The ghost in the photo album. The leather of the photo album felt cool against Billy's fingertips. It smelled like dust and old glue, a scent that tickled his nose and made him want to sneeze. He sat cross-legged on the faded Persian rug in the living room, sunlight slanting in through the gap in the curtains, illuminating the swirling patterns of red and gold. His dad was in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes a muffled counterpoint to the rustle of turning pages. He'd found the album tucked away in the attic, a treasure chest of forgotten smiles and sun-drenched memories. Mostly it was Mom. Mom laughing, Mom hugging, Mom pulling silly faces. He recognized the places. The beach at Cape Cod, the pumpkin patch in October, the redwood forest so tall it made his neck ache just thinking about it. There she was, her arms slung around Dad's shoulders, both of them grinning like fools, sand clinging to their bare feet. He traced the outline of her face with his finger. A cascade of auburn hair, a mischievous glint in her emerald eyes, a smile that could melt glaciers. He remembered the feeling of her hugs, warm and enveloping, like being wrapped in a favorite blanket. But the specifics, the sound of her voice, the way she smelled, those were fading, slipping away like sand through his fingers. He flipped the page. Mom, covered in flour, holding a lopsided cake. "Happy birthday, Billy," a caption scrawled in her handwriting declared. He hadn't even known she wrote like that. The letters tilted jauntily, full of life and energy. He felt a pang of guilt. He should remember this. He wanted to remember this. "Hey, Dad," he called out, his voice a little shaky. David appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His face was etched with a weariness that seemed to have become permanent. "What's up, sport?" Billy held up the album. "Look." David's smile faltered as he approached. He stood behind Billy, his hand resting lightly on his son's shoulder. The album lay open to a picture of Mom blowing out candles on a birthday cake, her face lit with joy. A long silence stretched between them. Billy could feel his dad's grip tighten slightly on his shoulder. He didn't say anything, just stared at the photo. The silence hung heavy, thick with unspoken grief and regret. Finally, David cleared his throat. "That was a good day," he said, his voice rough. He stepped back, avoiding Billy's gaze. "I should probably finish up in the kitchen." He retreated quickly, leaving Billy alone with the album and the ghost of his mother's laughter. Billy turned the page again, finding a picture of Mom hiking in the mountains. She was wearing a bright red jacket and a woolly hat, her cheeks flushed with exertion. She looked strong, capable, invincible. He stared at the photo, willing himself to remember more. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to conjure up her voice, her scent, the feeling of her hand in his. But all he got was a vague, blurry image, like a half-remembered dream. He wished he could ask his dad more about her, about their life together. But every time he tried, he saw the pain flicker in his eyes, the way he would clam up and change the subject. It was like Mom was a wound that could never fully heal, a topic too sensitive to touch. He closed the album, the leather cool against his skin again. He knew he'd keep looking at the photos, searching for clues, trying to piece together the fragments of his memory. Maybe, just maybe, if he looked hard enough, he could bring her back, even for a moment. He carried the album back to the attic, placing it carefully back in its hiding place. As he descended the stairs, he could still hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, a lonely soundtrack to his fading memories. He thought about his mom's favorite true crime show, and how she would always pause it to ask him what he thought. It was always his answer she was looking for. A postcard from paradise. The drawer's ceramic pull, cold and worn, greeted Billy's touch. He was after his worn baseball glove, the one his father insisted was stashed down here somewhere. This drawer usually entombed dead paperwork and expired warranties, but today, a sudden splash of color snagged his attention. A postcard. A sun-drenched vista of cerulean water filled the glossy surface. Coconut palms swayed with languid grace against a blazing sunset. Gaudy lettering proclaimed, "Greetings from paradise." Florida, hardly his father's territory. The man considered anything below the Mason-Dixon line exotic. He flipped the card. The address, penned in surprisingly elegant script, contrasted sharply with his dad's usual blocky print. Mr. Thomas Abernathy, it read, above their Hemlock Drive address. But the message chilled him. Thinking of you. The beach is calling. Remember our promise? Maybe soon. It was signed simply L. Billy scanned it again, a knot twisting his insides. He knew his father's handwriting like the back of his hand. This was not it. The airy, almost flirtatious tone was utterly alien to the man he knew. His mother, Sarah, wrote with a meticulous precision. He still kept a few of her old birthday greetings in a closet keepsake. This cursive possessed a bolder, more carefree swagger. It wasn't her. It was Elle. A wave of queasiness swept through him. The air thickened, pressing down with the weight of a summer storm. He pictured his father, years before, receiving this missive, secreting it away. Had his mother ever known? Or was this a whole other life, hidden in the shadows? He carefully returned the postcard to its hiding place, obscuring it beneath a jumble of old tax documents. He smoothed the papers, a futile gesture of erasure. A glint of sunlight on the edge of a faded receipt snagged his eye, a momentary flash. His mind reeled. His father wasn't perfect, no. Always a bit reserved, a man of few words, especially after the accident. But infidelity? That didn't square with the image of his parents. They were dependable, predictable, or so he'd always thought. The drawer clicked shut, the sound amplified in the quiet house. He needed to confide in someone. But who? He couldn't just confront his father with what? Exactly? He wasn't even sure what he was accusing him of. Perhaps it was a mistake, a wrong address, maybe anything but the truth taking root in his consciousness. He sought refuge in the kitchen, seizing a water bottle from the fridge. The icy plastic did little to quell the tremors in his hands. He gazed out the window at the familiar tableau of Hemlock Drive. Neighbors tending lawns, kids on bikes. Everything appeared unchanged, yet everything had shifted. The postcard had tainted his world, a venomous seed threatening to dismantle the bedrock of his family. The detective's words echoed in his mind. We found her in Jacksonville, alive. What other secrets had his father buried? Recognizing the script, Billy held the postcard out, his hand trembling slightly. The glossy image of a generic beach resort mocked the gray skies pressing against the windows of their small kitchen. Dad, look at this. David Harding, stirring instant coffee with a spoon, barely glanced up. He'd been lost in that familiar, internal landscape of grief, the one where Sarah's laughter echoed faintly and the world felt perpetually muted. What is it, Billy? Can't you see I'm making coffee? It was in a mailbox. Addressed to you. Billy pushed the card closer. The handwriting, doesn't it look familiar? David sighed, a sound like air leaking from a punctured tire. He took the card, holding it at arm's length as if it might bite. His brow furrowed, the lines etched deep by years of worry and sorrow. The cheerful postcard felt jarring against his somber mood. He peered at the message scrawled on the back. Thinking of you. Wish you were here. S. The spoon clattered against the ceramic mug as his hand began to shake. The coffee sloshed over the rim, a dark, spreading stain on the counter mirroring the growing unease in his stomach. He hadn't seen that handwriting in years. Not since. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to breathe. He brought the card closer, his eyes scanning each loop and curve of the letters. The S was distinctive, the way she always made the bottom curl back on itself, and the way the H leaned slightly to the left. It was a nervous tic she'd had, showing up even in her script. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Could it be? Was it possible? He'd spent 3 years burying her, building a life around the gaping hole she'd left behind. He'd visited her grave every Sunday, told her about Billy's soccer games and his struggles with math. He'd even started dating again, tentatively, only to find that every woman he met was measured against the impossible standard of Sarah's memory. Dad, Billy's voice was small, hesitant. Are you okay? You're really pale. David didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the postcard. The vibrant blues and greens of the tropical scene blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He hadn't cried like this in a long time, not since the funeral. He took a shaky breath, trying to regain control. It looks like your mother's writing, Billy." The words were barely a whisper, raspy and thick with emotion. Billy's eyes widened. "Mom's? But how?" David shook his head, his mind reeling. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the movement jerky and uncoordinated. "I don't know. I can't be sure. But the way she always did it." He trailed off, unable to articulate the torrent of emotions flooding him. Hope, disbelief, confusion, and a terrifying surge of something that felt a lot like joy. He gripped the edge of the counter, trying to ground himself. This couldn't be happening. It was some kind of cruel joke, or a mistake. A terrible, agonizing mistake. Maybe it's someone playing a prank, Billy suggested, his voice laced with a fragile hope that mirrored his own. David wanted to dismiss the idea, to crush it before it could take root and blossom into something he couldn't bear to lose again. But he couldn't. The handwriting, it was too familiar, too close. He looked at Billy, his son's face a mixture of fear and anticipation. He couldn't shield him from this. Not this time. "I don't know, Billy," he said, his voice stronger now, laced with a newfound resolve. "But we're going to find out. The Silverheart's secret." David Harding sat on the edge of Billy's bed, the springs groaning beneath his weight. His face, usually etched with laughter lines, was a roadmap of grief and sleeplessness. He looked older tonight, the flickering bedside lamp carving deep shadows under his eyes. "Your mom," he began, his voice raspy. "She always wore this necklace. A silver heart. Simple, but it was her. I gave it to her the day we got engaged. Said it was a symbol of my heart, always with her." Billy listened intently, his Spider-Man comforter pulled high. He'd heard stories about Mom before, snippets of happy memories, but never like this. Never with this intensity. "It was gone after the crash. I searched, Billy. Go, he searched. I tore that car apart, piece by piece. But it wasn't there. Just gone. Like her." David's voice cracked, and he looked away, focusing on a dust mote dancing in the lamplight. "Maybe it's in a box somewhere, Dad. You know, with her things?" Billy offered, trying to inject a note of optimism into the heavy atmosphere. David shook his head slowly. I don't know, Billy. Maybe." He stood, his knees popping with the effort. "Anyway, sleep tight, so." He patted Billy's head, a gesture that felt both familiar and strangely distant. After David left, the silence in the room felt thick and suffocating. Billy couldn't shake the image of the silver heart, lost and alone. He thought about his dad, the way his voice trembled, the raw pain in his eyes. Something felt off. He knew Dad wasn't telling him everything. An idea sparked in his mind, a tiny ember of curiosity that quickly flared into a full-blown fire. Dad's closet. He never let anyone near it, always kept it locked. Said it was his private space. But Billy had seen him unlock it, knew the hiding place for the key, under the ceramic elephant on the hallway table. He waited until he was sure Dad was asleep, the rhythmic snoring a muffled hum from downstairs. Then he slipped out of bed, his bare feet padding silently on the carpet. He retrieved the key, its cool ceramic surface a stark contrast to his suddenly sweaty palm. The closet door creaked open, releasing a musty scent of old leather and mothballs. The small bulb inside cast a weak, yellowish glow, illuminating a jumble of suits, coats, and forgotten relics. He rummaged through the pockets of the coats, feeling the rough texture of tweed and the smooth lining of wool. Nothing. Then, in the corner behind a stack of old photo albums, he saw a small cardboard box. It was tucked away, almost hidden. His heart hammered against his ribs as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst faded newspaper clippings, was a plane ticket. A one-way ticket to Phoenix, Arizona, dated 3 years ago, the day after the crash. The name on the ticket was Sarah Harding. Beneath the ticket, glinting in the dim light, was a silver heart. It hung on a delicate chain, its surface scratched and tarnished, but undeniably beautiful. Billy stared at it, his mind reeling. The necklace, the plane ticket, it didn't make any sense. Why would Dad hide these things? And if Mom was really dead, why was there a ticket in her name to Phoenix? A wave of nausea washed over him, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like a physical burden. He carefully placed everything back in a box, his hands shaking. He closed the closet door, replaced the key, and crept back to bed. The image of the silver heart burned into his memory. The air in his room felt colder now, the silence heavier, filled with a secret he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Following Dad to Florida, the taxi honked, a sharp, impatient bleat that yanked Billy from his hiding spot behind the overgrown hydrangea bush. He peeked through the leaves, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Dad, his shoulders hunched under the weight of a worn duffel bag, hurried out of the house. No bouvier, not even a backward glance. Billy waited until the taxi had rounded the corner, engine fading into the morning hum of the neighborhood, before emerging. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and impending rain. He fished the crumpled photograph from his pocket. Mom, smiling, sun-drenched, impossibly alive. He clutched it tight, the glossy surface slick against his sweaty palm. Florida. That's where the news report had said she was found. Florida. He ran. The bus ride to the airport felt like an eternity, each stop an agonizing delay. Billy kept his head down, pulling his baseball cap low, acutely aware of every cough, every glance. He felt like a fugitive, a tiny speck of guilt in the vast, uncaring city. At the airport, the chaos was a disorienting assault on his senses. The flashing screens, the loudspeaker announcements, the relentless tide of people. It all threatened to swallow him whole. He scanned the crowd, searching for Dad's familiar slump. He spotted him near gate 42, pacing nervously, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dad kept checking his watch, his brow furrowed in that way that meant he was wrestling with something big, something bad. Billy hung back, melting into the anonymity of the crowd. He watched as Dad finally joined the queue, his movements jerky and uncertain. He saw him hand over his ticket, watched as the gate attendant smiled, a practiced, empty smile, and waved him through. Panic clawed at Billy's throat. He had to get on that plane. He waited until the last possible moment, until the gate attendant was distracted by a crying baby and a frazzled-looking mother. He slipped under the rope, his heart a frantic drum solo in his chest. "Ticket, son." The attendant's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Billy froze. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a crumpled bus ticket. I lost it." The attendant raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Lost it, huh? And where are you headed?" "Florida," Billy blurted out, the word a desperate plea. My dad's already on the plane. He's expecting me." He pointed vaguely towards the boarding tunnel. The attendant hesitated, her gaze lingering on Billy's anxious face. He thought she might call security, might expose him, but then she sighed, a weary sound that spoke of long shifts and endless petty dramas. "All right, kid, go on, but don't let me catch you flying without a ticket again." Billy didn't wait for her to change her mind. He bolted down the tunnel, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The plane was a metal beast, its engines a low, menacing growl. He found Dad halfway down the aisle, already buckled into his seat, staring blankly out the window. He looked older, somehow, more defeated than Billy had ever seen him. Billy slipped into the empty seat beside him. Dad didn't even flinch. He just kept staring out the window, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen horizon. "Dad," Billy whispered, his voice trembling. Dad turned slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Billy? What are you doing here?" His voice was a strangled rasp. Billy clutched the photograph tighter, his knuckles white. "I know about Mom, Dad. I know she's alive." The plane began to taxi down the runway. The engines roared, drowning out everything but the frantic pounding of Billy's heart. He braced himself for the inevitable explosion, the anger, the denial. But it never came. Dad just stared at him, his face crumbling, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently took the photograph from Billy's grasp. "Oh, Billy," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "What have I done?" A beach town reunion. The Florida sun beat down on Palm Breeze, its intensity searing the quaint storefronts and thickening the air into a humid haze. Billy, behind the wheel of Dad's eye-searing orange rental, a convertible his father would typically disdain, squinted against the glare. He'd dogged Dad's drab sedan from Orlando, a surveillance operation that felt like it had aged him a lifetime. The briny tang of the ocean mingled with the saccharine scent of sunscreen, a world away from the antiseptic chill of the hospital. Palm fronds swayed in a languid dance, scattering fractured shadows across the asphalt. The town felt off. Too bright. Too ordinary. He parked opposite a cluster of restaurants vying for the best seafood title. Dad's car was a short distance away, near an ice cream parlor radiating a cheerful, almost artificial glow. Billy cut the engine, a nervous flutter warring with the acidic taste of highway coffee in his gut. Stepping out, the heat enveloped him like a stifling shroud. He smoothed his t-shirt, self-conscious, feeling like a pretender playing a role in a sun-drenched stage production. He ambled along, alert, the cries of gulls overhead like nails on a chalkboard. Then he spotted him, Dad on the boardwalk, back turned, engaged in conversation. With a woman. Billy's pulse surged. He hadn't witnessed Dad genuinely connect with a woman since the accident. Since Mom. He forced the thought down. He edged closer, shielded by the vibrant displays of a souvenir shop. The distant rhythm of the surf and the joyous shrieks of children faded in a background noise. His entire world narrowed to his father. Dad was gesturing emphatically, a liveliness in his movements Billy hadn't seen in ages, animated, almost buoyant. The woman's back was to him, revealing a cascade of blonde hair that shimmered in the light. She wore a simple white sundress that puffed gently in the coastal breeze. It was her posture, relaxed and at ease, that struck Billy most. Dad habitually carried himself with a stiff reserve. Yet, in her presence, he appeared lighter. He inched forward, his sneakers soundless on the sun-warmed planks. He peered cautiously around a collection of seashell chimes. He had to see her face. He needed to. The woman's laughter, a soft, chiming sound, resonated through Billy. Dad smiled, a true smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, a smile absent for too long. And then she turned. Billy froze, every muscle locking. Her eyes held the same familiar blue, the gentle curve of her cheek, the subtle dimple that punctuated her smiles. Impossible. It simply couldn't be. But as she faced him, the world seemed to lurch and spin. It was her. It was Mom, the woman with no memory. A palpable tension filled the antiseptic air, a weight Billy couldn't quite define. His father stood rigid, disbelief etched on his features as the woman in the hospital bed returned his gaze, a furrow creasing her brow. A choked sound escaped Dad's lips, a failed attempt to articulate the maelstrom of emotions churning within him. Sarah, the woman's eyes, still that arresting shade of blue, darted around the room, then settled on Dad, a flicker of something indecipherable within their depths. I don't understand. Who are you? Her voice, thin and hesitant, splintered the silence. David lurched forward, hand outstretched, but she flinched. It's me, David. Your husband. A glint of alarm sparked in her eyes. I don't have a husband. My memory, it's a blank. A painful knot tightened in Billy's throat. He moved closer, his own voice wavering. Mom? It's Billy, your son. Her gaze shifted to him, paused momentarily, then drifted away, leaving behind that same empty expression. The air whooshed from David's lungs. He collapsed into the bedside chair, burying his face in his hands. Grief permeated the room, heavier than after the initial tragedy. This was different, not closure, but a warped, cruel imitation of the past. Later, after the examination, after David had presented a slideshow of their life together, the wedding album, sun-drenched vacations, holiday celebrations, all met with that same vacant stare, the doctor guided them to a small, private room. Mrs. Harding is experiencing severe retrograde amnesia, he explained, his tone somber and professional. She has no recollection of her life before the incident. Her past has essentially been wiped clean. But can she recover her memories? Dad's voice was ragged, desperate. The doctor sighed, a sound heavy with uncertainty. It's impossible to predict. Sometimes memory returns spontaneously. Sometimes it can be triggered by familiar surroundings, locations, people, objects. However, there's also the very real possibility that the amnesia will be permanent. Dad's fist clenched white-knuckled. What incident are you talking about? According to our records, she was discovered unconscious near the California coast just over 3 years ago. She'd suffered a significant head trauma. She had no identification and remained in state care until we could identify her using information from your missing persons report. Billy watched his father, fearing he might crumble. Squeezing Dad's shoulder, Billy said, "We'll help her, Dad. We'll bring her home, and we'll help her remember." David looked up, eyes swimming with tears. "Home? Billy, she doesn't even recognize us. What kind of home is that?" "It's a starting point." Billy aimed for reassurance, though his own heart was heavy with doubt. He knew bringing her home wouldn't be a simple fix. It would be a grueling journey, rife with uncertainty and potential despair. He recalled her seashell collection, the intricate sculptures she'd create from them. He wondered if seeing them would ignite something, a spark of recognition in those vacant blue eyes. Perhaps they could rebuild their lives. A fragile, hopeful perhaps, a drawing from the heart. The drawing, clutched like a fragile bird behind Billy's back, dampened in his sweaty grip. He spotted Mom on the porch, painstakingly arranging her seaside finds on driftwood. The sunset gilded the tableau, outlining the nape of her neck and the serene focus etched on her face. Reluctantly, he broke the spell. She looked so at peace in her waterside sanctuary. A nervous cough escaped him. "Mom!" Sarah turned, her sea-glass eyes latching onto him, the usual warmth of balm that eased his unease. "Hey, hon, what's that you got?" He edged closer, offering the crumpled paper. "I made something for you." Her fingers brushed his as she accepted it. He suppressed a shiver. Physical affection remained a minefield. Unfurling the drawing, she examined it. Simplistic, even crude, yet imbued with his best efforts. Two figures stood together, rudimentary stick people, differentiated only by her long, flowing hair and his own spiky crown. He'd colored them with vibrant hues, sunshine yellow for their faces, sky blue for their shirts. Above them, a blazing sun reigned. "It's us," he breathed, barely audible. "Back then, in the old house. Remember?" Sarah scrutinized the artwork, a faint crease appearing between her brows. Her customary smile waned, replaced by an expression of intense concentration, bordering on discomfort. Her fingertip traced the yellow sun, circling it repeatedly. Silence descended, thick and expectant. Billy's breath hitched in his throat. He'd mentally staged this encounter for days, perfecting his delivery. Now, only waiting remained. He noticed a tremor dance through her hands as she held the paper. The clarity in her eyes seemed to muddy, as though a storm was gathering behind them. Guilt gnawed at him for dredging up a potentially lost past. Yet he couldn't yield. Not yet. "The old house," she echoed, the words sounding alien on her tongue. "Was it near the ocean?" Hope surged through Billy. "Yes. A small place just blocks from the beach. We walked there every day, remember? You'd gather shells, just like here. You always call them ocean treasures." Sarah's eyes snapped shut, her features tightening. He thought he saw her recoil. I can't," she gasped, her voice fractured. "I don't remember." Disappointment crashed over him, a familiar, bitter tide. He'd dared to hope, however faintly, and now it lay in ruins. Reaching to retrieve the drawing, he found her grip unyielding. Her eyes fluttered open, and Billy's breath caught. A lone tear snaked down her cheek, catching the light like liquid crystal. Not a sob, not a cry, a silent, solitary pearl. Yet it spoke volumes. "Why am I sad?" she murmured, her voice laced with confusion and a touch of dread. "Why does this drawing make me feel so hollow?" Billy was speechless. He longed to unleash a torrent of recollections, to reignite her memories, to pull her back to him. But he knew such a feat wasn't so straightforward. Instead, he reached out and gently brushed away the tear. It's okay, Mom, he soothed. It's okay to feel sad. It just means something's trying to come back. Her gaze locked onto his, searching his face for answers to unspoken questions. Then, she cradled the drawing to her chest, her knuckles bone white. Tell me more, she implored, her voice a mere whisper. Tell me more about us. Homecoming. The salt air, thick and familiar, kissed Sarah's face as David steered the car down the familiar lane. 3 years. 3 years, he'd thought. He swallowed, the lump in his throat a permanent resident these days. He glanced at Sarah in the passenger seat. Her eyes, wide and clear, were fixed on the approaching house. It's nice, she said, her voice hesitant like testing the waters. It's home, David replied, trying to inject more certainty into his voice than he felt. He pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, a sound that used to annoy him, now a welcome symphony. The house stood bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun, the porch swaying gently in the breeze. It looked just as he'd left it, a little overgrown maybe, but stubbornly standing. Their daughter, Emily, practically exploded out of the car, racing towards the front door. Mom, come see my room. I redecorated. Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that chased away some of the shadows clinging to David's heart. She followed Emily inside, her hand trailing along the faded floral wallpaper in the hallway. This wallpaper, she murmured, her brow furrowed. I think I picked this out. David's breath hitched. You did, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. The house felt different now, lighter. The air, once heavy with grief, seemed to vibrate with a nascent joy. Emily chattered nonstop, showing Sarah her collection of seashells, each one meticulously labeled. Later, as David was grilling chicken in the backyard, he watched Sarah and Emily sitting on the porch swing, heads bent close together, whispering secrets. The aroma of grilling chicken mingled with the salty tang of the ocean, creating a comforting, familiar fragrance. Remember that time we tried to build a sandcastle so big it would touch the sky? Emily asked, giggling. Sarah laughed, a light, melodic sound that David hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. We ended up covered in sand and seaweed, didn't we? A flicker of recognition crossed Sarah's face, a brief spark in the fog of her memory. Yes, she said, her voice soft. We did. That night, after Emily was asleep, David found Sarah in the living room, sitting on the floor surrounded by seashells. She was carefully arranging them into intricate patterns, her brow furrowed in concentration. What are you doing? He asked, his voice gentle. I don't know, she confessed, looking up at him with a puzzled expression. I feel compelled to do this, like I'm supposed to be creating something. He sat down beside her, the worn wooden floor cool beneath him. He picked up a delicate, pearly shell, turning it over in his fingers. You always loved making things with seashells, he said, a wistful smile playing on his lips. You used to make the most beautiful necklaces and bracelets. Sarah took the shell from him, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. I think I remember that. The days that followed were a delicate dance of hope and uncertainty. Small details surfaced, a favorite song, a shared joke, the way David always burned the toast. Each memory, a tiny shard of glass, slowly piecing together the mosaic of their life. One evening, while they were eating dinner, Emily started telling a story about a school play she'd been in. Sarah suddenly interrupted. Wait, wasn't that the play where you forgot your lines and started singing, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Emily's eyes widened. Mom, how did you know that? Sarah smiled, a genuine, knowing smile. I just remembered. David felt a surge of hope, a fragile bud pushing through the hard earth of his grief. He looked at Sarah, her face radiant in the candlelight. Maybe, just maybe they could rebuild. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. But even as he held onto that hope, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. A question he couldn't shake. What happened during those 3 years? And why couldn't she remember anything before that? He knew he couldn't ignore it forever.